Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Hauskeller. Thank you for coming to our colloquium today. Our guest today is Yakov Makan, who's a shaman and is going to talk, no, not talk, he's actually presenting on his work on movement, and he's brought some drums, which look really fascinating. Thank you very much, Yakov. I mean, everybody has your biography, so I was going to read it out. Is that okay?
Sure. Not so interesting.
Thank you for coming here, and I very much look forward to this sort of exciting enterprise that is our workshop or seminar today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here in the flesh and at home, wherever you guys are tuning in from. So a few words to begin. Like, how is it that a Jewish guy born in Liverpool got to end up as playing the role of shaman in the modern world, and what even does that mean in the modern world? And I just to give you some kind of sense of, when I was growing up, I was really, my big passion was the questions that had no answers. Like, if I would expand my mind as far as it could go as a kid, like right to the edge of what my rabbi told me was God, then my question was, okay, great, but what created God? So, and that, whether God exists or not the point. What I was in love with was the mystery, that edge between what's apparently known and what's apparently unknown, which is, I think, the place of learning, isn't it? If you're at university, you're a scientist, that place of what's known, which is, and the edge of what's known is the beginning of what's unknown. And that edge is the classic edge on which the archetype of the shaman did their work. And so as I was growing up, I, like many people, found it kind of challenging to live in a world where what was being said and what was being felt and what was being shown in the body were very often very different things. So somebody might be telling you, yeah, you know, how are you? Oh, I'm really, really good. And you can see their shoulders up round their ears and they're hardly breathing. And, you know, even as a child, these things, they create a dissonance, like a feeling of discomfort, where we recognize that for some reason, it's quite hard for us to answer a simple question like, how are you? How do you feel today? What's going on with you? Like, what matters to you in your life? So this was the ground on which I was struggling. I was a sportsman because playing sport was the only place where, you know, you could be that physical and swear and shout and kind of fight without being in a fight and compete. And there was a lot of space for all of that frustration that was in me as a human being, as a young person growing up, to express. And that was that, and the football terraces where I was able to survive. Again, football terrace is a great place to go to be able to sing and shout and swear. And as a kid in those days, that was at home and in the culture I was growing up in, not okay. So there were these places that were like letting off steam places. And I was never a dancer, I can tell you that. The idea of dancing and the fact that I've ended up my professional life teaching people to move, not to do steps, but that they are at their most creative and open and intelligent when they're in movement. That's one of life's little jokes, that I should end up doing that, because I was super uncomfortable, like the idea of dance. Like, you know, at that time, teenage time, it was a couple of beers and then only one song that I would ever dance to. And yeah, it was a great track. Still got it, actually. And it's called Here We Are in the Monkey House by Animal Magnet. It's a good rocking track. And just used to, for some reason, get me going. So I could survive one track. And then in my early 20s, I was playing golf with a mate on the, you know, free golf course in East London, where I was living at the time. And a storm came over the hills, and still really don't quite know why we did this, but we got out our golf umbrella, stood under the golf umbrella. You know, golf umbrellas have a metal tip. And we were stood on the hill of a golf course, and not surprisingly, got hit by lightning. My friend got thrown off me like a long way, and I felt a bit like a tent peg that had just been bashed into the ground. I was fine. I had no visible sign of injury. In fact, I felt pretty good, probably better than I'd ever felt. And the thing that happened in that moment was the recognition, well, I could easily be dead now. Maybe I should be dead, but I'm not. And suddenly the recognition of how fragile life is and how short life is, this is in my early 20s, hit me, and there was a kind of urgency woke up in me, and an urgency to discover and ask the kinds of questions I was asking as a child. And through that journey of asking those questions, I discovered something called shamanism. And shamanism is it's a very big subject. And, you know, you go to any corner of the world, anywhere, anytime, and you will find people who were working in traditions that could be generically described as shamanic. And they are very, very diverse in their approach, but they have some universal principle. And one of those universal principles is rhythm, like rhythm, listening to rhythm and the effect that rhythm has on the body. That's why I brought these drums, and I'm going to invite you to experience some of the effect of rhythm and to really pay attention in a particular way, just out of fascination, really, to see what you might pick up from that. So the role of the shaman traditionally was to be on that edge. They lived on the edge of the village often, they still do. The old shamans that I know and am close to in the Amazon, and used to be close to a guy up in the very north of Europe in the Sami tradition who died, unfortunately, a few years ago. A very, very unusual man. This is his drum, actually, which he gave me in the last time I saw him. And I met him, actually, I met him in my dreams. And I was dreaming about this guy for about 10 to 12 years before the idea struck me that he actually might be a living human being. And it wasn't my idea, somebody else told me. You know, if you've been dreaming of the same person and you see him and where he lives so long and so repetitively, maybe he's alive. Maybe that's his way of, maybe he doesn't have a mobile phone, maybe he hasn't got your telephone number, maybe he's using the old World Wide Web, which is dreaming. Because, hi, welcome. So I was lucky enough to find and meet traditional shamans who were able to help me to make sense of the kinds of experiences I was having as a kid and the kind of sense of experience I'd had whenever I'd been with, anyone who was struggling with disease. And that could be physical disease, or could be people who were having mental difficulties, people who were depressed. There was, I remember as a child, like the intensity of feeling I would have in my body when I was close to somebody who was suffering. And I don't think that's particularly unusual. I think that we are, as children, unbelievably sensitive creatures. And we learn to, in order to survive, to become a little less sensitive, which is kind of useful. But we lose some of that capacity to experience the more awe-inspiring side of life. Often as we become adults, we kind of get very serious and focused. And if you've grown up in the industrial world, then we are educated that our mind is the be-all and end-all of intelligence. And I'm certainly not a critic of the mind. The mind is absolutely necessary part of our intelligence. However, if you take the mind and separate it from the body and from the heart, like you're not paying attention to your physical intelligence and your emotional intelligence and the weave of those three, then we are extremely limited in our capacity to perceive ourselves or each other. Why does that matter? Well, it means that most of the conversations we're having, we're not actually understanding what the other person is saying. Most of the time, if we're just in our mental intelligence, we're already in the thinking about our response. We're not taking in what's being said. We don't feel what's being said. So there's this wonderful, relatively new word that's come onto the scene thanks to neuroscience, which is interoception. Interoception, I would say, is for people who've grown up in the Western world, the shamanic power that is most necessary for us to develop. So what is interoception? Interoception is the capacity to be able to describe what's happening in the body, to give it words, to give it language. And so it means perception of the interior. There's been a lot of research done about interoception. People who lack interoception, lack empathy. It's actually not possible for us to have actual empathy for another if we are not paying some attention to that interoceptive intelligence. People, the more interoceptive people are, the better they listen. Now, I find that really interesting. Like if I'm in a conversation and I'm just up here playing head tennis with ideas, there are some things for which that's useful, great. But if it's about a relationality, it's about friendship, it's about understanding, it's about listening to a different point of view than my own, then in order to listen, I need some more ground in my own being. I need interoception. I need to know that feeling in the soles of my feet so that when I'm talking, I'm actually aware of my backbone, or when I'm listening, I'm aware of the physical sensation in my body. So just as I say those words to you, close your eyes for a moment, if you would, and just notice what's the sensation. Let's just start in the feet. Do you sense anything in your feet? Like, can you feel temperature, sensation? And could you find a word to describe that experience? Just if you find one word, speak it out loud.
Mechanosensation. Mechanosensation.
Mechanosensation. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Enclosed.
Enclosed. Mm-hmm. Other sensation.
This warmth irradiating from the points where my feet touch the ground.
Warmth radiating from the points where my feet touch the ground. And so as you say that, what happens? Does anything change when you name it?
Properly on the ground.
I notice, and the research that's been done about interoception, I notice, for instance, when you say those words, my feet feel warm from the ground. And the second I name that sensation is stronger. Therefore, I'm more grounded, I'm more present. So interoception is a way of becoming physically present. Why does that matter? And I want to relate this to an idea that I first heard from one of my teachers, who was a New York shaman, a wild creature with long black hair and a long black leather jacket and dark sunglasses, more like a rock star than a shaman. And her name was Gabrielle Roth, and she created a body of work called the Five Rhythms, which is a free dance form. And she created it because she was working at Exeter in the 60s, which was a real cooking pot, pressure cooker of new ideas and new thinking and new understanding of the human psyche, and a collision of all kinds of ideas coming from all kinds of places. And therapies were being really brought into their forms, like Gestalt psychotherapy was at Esalen was really a strong place for the development of that. And she, as a young woman, she was there, she lived in that area, and there were all these people who were Californians mostly, coming together to investigate, like, why do I feel so, what was the word you used? Enclosed. I think they might say imprisoned, like just stuck, like uncreative, half asleep rather than half awake. And she, in that cooking pot, discovered a way of working with dance. She'd actually been told, because she had an injury, that she would never dance again. And she was there at Esalen on this deck, and there was a guy there who's was a very extraordinary musician called Babatunde Olatunji, who was one of the first West African musicians to come over he came to America and to really bring the spirit of that music to actually America at that point, and had a huge effect on the development of music. And he and his people were drumming one night on the deck, and Gabrielle just was listening to the drums, and she said that as she was listening to those drums, her body stood up and started to move. It wasn't like, oh, I think I should dance now. Should I dance now? I don't know. Should I? Well, I make a fool of myself. There was none of that. It was just purely this sense of life standing her up, and she let go to those drums. She just let go. She went wild, and she danced for hours and sweating, and she was a very dramatic, theatrical being, and like pointed fingers, like almost like an archetypal, like what you might describe as a modern witch. I don't know if anyone's seen A Discovery of Witches. Have you been watching that? Any of you seen that? Oh, classic. Well worth a watch. Anyway, she had that kind of pointy, edgy, unpredictable manner. And the way she taught was in that way. Like you never knew quite what you were going to when I went to work with her. And the whole thing was, listen, guys, you have a choice. There's self-consciousness, that hurts, it's painful, it doesn't feel good. Or there's consciousness. And there's only really the one way I know to move from self-consciousness to consciousness is to get in your body and let rhythm move you, especially if you were brought up in the industrial world, especially if your education has been mostly disembodied, mostly about bringing the focus of our attention up out of the body and into not even the whole brain, but a particular section of the brain. And that section of the brain we crown as the royalty of reality and let that part of our intelligence tell us what's real and what isn't. And that's limited. It's very useful, but it's limited use, again. So what Gabrielle taught often is that shamanism is indigenous to its own culture. It's indigenous to its own culture. And what I talked with her many, many times about this. And what I came to understand, the meaning that she was offering through that is that a shaman is basically somebody who's grown up within a particular system and has experienced the worst edges of that system, the suffering of incarnation, the difficulty of being a child, of education, of finding friends, of discovering identity. All of those difficulties they've experienced usually in quite a strong or even extreme way. So they understand what are the wounds of the particular culture that they've grown up in. Like, what's it like to grow up in a culture where the father's work has become invisible, like through the Industrial Revolution, like father used to be part of the family, work was visible, was just present. And then Industrial Revolution, father disappears out the door, goes to do work and is no longer, their work is no longer visible. What's the effect of that on the relationship between father and child? And we only have to look at the very desperate statistics in the industrial world about the level of abuse that goes on in the home, whether it's domestic or sexual abuse that goes on in the home. This is huge, and only through the bravery of and the support of many different therapeutic traditions and understanding, and the bravery of people starting to tell those stories, do we now start to understand how wrong things have been going. If you think 4 out of 6 women suffered some kind of that experience, around 2 to 3 young men have experienced something of that. There's something seriously wrong in the home, like this place, which is ideally a place of nurturing. Like, we're very blessed. We have family in the Amazon rainforest, people who become family. We went there first invited through an organization, through the Pachamama Alliance, which is an organization that was called into being by the indigenous people themselves. It wasn't some do-gooding non-government organization from outside looking at problems over there and going, we're going to tell you what to do. This organization was born out of one shaman's vision, where he saw the effect of our culture's thirst for oil on the lands, the culture, the life of his people. He saw the damage that was coming. And this guy is a guy called Raphael Taish. He's still alive, very much so. He's a super strong little guy, about my height, but packed with, when you see him in ceremony, you understand why they call him the Jaguar Shaman. His eyes look like cat's eyes. He's just has that presence of somebody who studied something for more than 60 years, like intensely studied and lived a way of life that gives him a kind of presence that is magnetic and effective. So he saw this tragedy that was coming. And the Achuar, his people, they have a very clear idea in the culture, which they teach to their kids. Like if you have a nightmare as an Achuar child, you'll wake up, and people sleep pretty much in the same space. You'll wake up, you'll say, I had a nightmare, and you'll be invited to go back into your nightmare and to go and turn around and face the thing that you are frightened of and tell that thing, this is my dream. Can you imagine that as a kid? Like you go in, you're having a nightmare and you go into, if you're lucky enough, it's safe enough to go into a parent or a guardian's room, and you say, I've been having a nightmare, and they just tell you, don't worry, it's not real. Or, just, come and have a hug and get back to sleep and don't wake me up again. Or the difference between that and the interest, like, oh, you had a nightmare. Like, what was going on? Like, what was chasing you? What was scary? Good. Go back, stand and walk towards the very thing that's scaring you. The Achuar are a warrior culture. When the conquistadors came 500 years ago, 400 or 500 years ago, the Achuar saw them off, even though the conquistadors had cannon and gun and everything else. These are fierce warriors. They are like, there's no kind of messing around with these people. And they were killing each other. They were at war with each other. And as a result, partly of Raphael's dream, where they saw that actually there was a greater danger than their neighbor. There was a greater danger called the industrial world's thirst for wood, material, and oil. And we need to make peace. We need to make peace with each other, even though you killed my brother and I killed your mother and your grandfather killed my uncle. And even though we have every reason to go on killing each other, we've recognized that there is a greater threat to something that's greater than our hurt. Something that's greater than our hurt. So the Achuar have stepped forward and they invited people from the industrial world to join with them in an alliance led by them to protect the forest and to protect their culture. And they managed to get in an Italian priest, Catholic priest, to help them to make peace together, so they could actually talk and they could share the horrors that they'd experienced. They could be heard in that. It wasn't like some frothy, new agey, like, oh, let's just hold hands and make peace now. This was serious work to acknowledge the suffering that had happened. And this is relevant to us because we're living in a world now, aren't we, where there is so much hurt now. The stories are starting to be told that need to be heard, whether it's to do with colonialism or gender, or there are any number of stories where there's been enormous hurt, and those stories need to be heard. But if we can learn from our Achuar friends, we don't have to be identified through those stories. I don't have to hold on to those stories as my identity. I can actually see that there's a greater issue going on. This is shamanism. Shamans were the original system thinkers. They understood that their own tiny little existence and the existence of their families and the relationship between them and the relationship between them and the land that they were living, and the weather and the animals that they hunted, and the whole interrelated sphere that they were part of. They understood that there was a necessity to be in relationship with that. And that was their role, was to support the tribe, to recognize that their own personal journey was part of a community journey that was part of a much wider community web. And that in order to live a healthy life, there needed to be recognition of that relationship and that interrelated field. That's what ceremony is about. This is what ritual was about. It's springtime. Like, do we just look outside and go, how lovely the daffodils are out? Or do we recognize that surge of life that if we are embodied, we'll notice the spring. And if we're sensible, then we would go into a ritual space, a community space, where we acknowledge change. We acknowledge, oh, we're changing from winter to spring. There's a change that's happening. That means something to how I sleep, how I eat, how I communicate, what my work is in the springtime, because I'm connected to nature, because I'm dependent on the health of nature. And the role of the shaman, as well as marking the changing seasons, their role was also to support people to mark the changing seasons of their own life. Like, what's it like for a young woman when she first comes into her moon cycle? Like, is that something to be celebrated, something to be with the women, to learn from the elders, to have ceremony, to be welcomed, to be taught some of the magic and the mystery of that experience? Or is it something that just, happens behind closed doors and it's a bit confusing and we just kind of get on with it and pretend something's not happening? The same for us when we shift from being children to being young adults. If we don't mark that change with some form of initiation, then we're left to manage the effects of that and the chaos of that without the support of our community, without the support of people who've been through that, who can guide us. So I asked the first time I was with the Achua, I said, how do you initiate your young people? Like, what's the process that they go through? And I was with a shaman called Ensakwa, and he said that when a young person reaches that change in the body, like huge hormonal shift that happens, that it's not like on your 13th birthday or on this phase of the moon, it's when it happens in your body, then you would go to the shaman and say, I'm in this change. And that would be the signal that now is the time to go into a deep ritual space where you can be safely held and challenged to discover what is, as you shift from being a child into a young adult, what interests you in your life? Really, what are you about? What makes you happy? What floats your boat? What gets you up in the morning? What's your passion in life? What's your life for? And so then the young person would go out and they'd find a kapok tree. Kapoks are by far the biggest trees in the forest. They are enormous, magnificent beings, and they're sacred to all the indigenous peoples that I've met in the forest, because they are, you can see they're like, you know, that they are, each one of them a unique and extraordinary being. And they are considered to hold the spirits of the ancestors. It's a gathering place, because when those ancestors were going through that change, they went through a similar kind of initiatory experience. So what's the initiation? I asked. And well, you go out there and you make a tiny little shelter just to keep the rain off. And you sit there, and then the shaman will come and they'll give you some medicine. And the medicine will make you physically blind for 3 days and nights. And you won't be able to see through your eyes. But that medicine, in that tradition, they say, opens your spiritual sight. And you will be with the spirits of the forest, and you're going to, for that 72-hour period, while you're under the influence of this extremely strong medicine, you will focus on one thing, and that is to find the spirit of the forest and ask the spirit of the forest, tell me, please, what's my life for? What's the driving heart of what I am here on this earth for? And then you'll return and you'll tell the shaman and the community will mirror back to you. And so interesting, if you watch families with the kids, they're always watching, like, what's this child interested in? Oh, look, they're forever playing with sticks and making shapes and structures, and they really look like they like constructing and building things. Well, you know, who's the best house builder in our community? They should probably go and hang out with them, you know, for a few hours a week, not to learn anything, just to be with them and see how they are. And that person, they're always looking at the plants, and they're interested in the smells and the tastes and what's food and what's medicine. Send them off to the herbalist for a few hours once a week so they can hang out and just learn. So they're already watching for what are the things that the child loves. What are they really fascinated in? Did anyone do that for you at school? Did anyone like really pay attention to the thing that you are really, really fascinated in and ask you about it? Did they?
That'd be a role for parents rather than school.
And did your parents do that for you?
No, I don't think they did it particularly successfully, but I think there was an attempt.
There was an attempt, yeah. My dad thought I should be an actuary. I had to look it up. Like, what's an actuary? Oh, they're the guys who they're the mathematicians who work out the statistics for the insurance companies. It's a very secure job. My dad wanted security for me. Thank you, Papa. But wasn't quite my thing. I wasn't really good at maths, so didn't help. So that fascination, that community support of the individual, and the knowledge, the stronger the individual, the stronger the community. The more the individual is supported to be themselves in community, the stronger that community is. And the Achuar have managed, against all odds, to protect their environment, their culture, their forest, and not just for them, but they know that they're doing that for us too. They're very clear about it. And the first time we took a group to meet, there was a young leader called Augustine, and he stood up in front of this group, and we asked him, like, what's your message for the people in our world? And he stood there with his spear and he said, I want you to know that every single one of us would go to the grave before we allow our forests to be taken by any oil company. And they mean it. And so far, so good. That's actually a good news story. They're doing really good, and they're creating more and more projects, and they're really engaged with a dialogue with people in the industrial world to learn and to share their knowledge. So the role of the shaman in the psyche, and like as an archetype, I feel very passionately that this archetype is part of our human inheritance. And you have to look at the relatively recent history with shamanic practice, or all the different practices that could broadly be put under that umbrella, whether it was the druids or the witches, like the wise women in the communities. In Europe, all of those traditions were brutally attacked by the church. And, there's no getting away from that. There was a huge damage done to that wisdom. And you will know, I'm sure, through some of your studies, that what our ancestors experienced is part of our inheritance. So therefore, there is a genuine and quite broad mistrust of the shamanic. Would you agree with me? Like, if I ask you, like, what's your idea of a shaman in the modern world? Would you generally trust somebody who's standing up saying, "Oh, I'm a shaman, and this is my thing"? Would you be a little bit suspicious or interested? Tell me.
Super suspicious always, because it is now converted into something that can make money. So that creates different possibilities for what the shaman's intentions are.
Right.
And they will always be charismatic people whose entire aura will be inviting. Which in itself is something to distrust and be cynical about.
I'm curious.
I mean, which it doesn't mean that I don't think that like most shamans abroad, they just need to like pass the test of like, is this person just telling me a story in order to make money out of my misery and suffering.
Understood. And thank you. Really well said. Yes.
There's far many more people that I distrust more than someone saying that, such as politicians,
Right.
certain brands of scientists,
Right.
journalists, etc.
Right. Yeah.
So no, I wouldn't necessarily inherently distrust them.
Okay.
But of course, one difference is that sort of shaman, like all things that it's very dependent on being recognized by others. I think one can't announce oneself to be a shaman. It is something that has to, not by certificate, but by some other form of recognition.
Yeah.
Something that is actually a role you play in a community, just like you described.
Yeah.
So there is a community that actually needs to also give you that role and trust you in that role. Otherwise, you are not really a shaman.
This is absolutely true. And that thank you very much for bringing that up, because that, for me, the whole taking on that role has been a massive challenge, and very uncomfortable to manage that. And the only reason in the end that I agreed even to use the language was because the indigenous people that I was working with were very clear that there was a lot of exactly what you described going on in the industrial world, and a lot of people claiming that role and misusing that. And they asked me, would you just go and raise a little flag for what what the shaman's role actually is, which is to be in service of the well-being and harmony of the community that you serve. And you're absolutely right. It's not a role that you just stand up and say, oh yeah, I've decided that I'm a shaman now, although lots of people do. It's something that's given to you by your elders, given to you by your community, like in some traditions. Like I was lucky enough to go to an initiation in South Africa, and the test for the young initiate was to come before their community and to share with them some of their skills. Like, for instance, something precious would be hidden, and the young initiate would have to find it. They'd have to divine, where is it? And so they have to prove themselves to that. It's like, I guess, like, you know, when you go for an interview for a final exam, that kind of thing. And then your community either welcomes you or says, no, off you go. You need another year of training. You're not quite there yet.
It is by exam.
And it's by exam, yes. And so one thing, I'm married to a woman called Susanna, who's currently in Prague doing a training to be on the research program that's happening here, which is wonderful. I'm super grateful for the work that's happening here in this university, that there is this deep and careful research going on into how can these practices, which have traditionally been shamanic, be useful in the modern world. And one of my questions is how can the role of a modern shaman support that research? Like, what's the use of ritual in a setting where somebody is coming with an addiction or with a particular memory of trauma or with depression? And what can be added to that setting that might improve the results of healing? So all the shamans that I got to work with, they were very, very clear with myself and Susanna. Look, we're not training you to be an Amazonian shaman. Like you're a Jewish guy from Liverpool. You're not an Amazonian. You didn't grow up here. This is not your tradition, not your culture. You need to translate the experience that you're having here into forms that could be useful on your land with people who've grown up with similar kind of disembodiment to you. And as I was saying earlier on, Gabrielle's real strong assertion that shamanism is indigenous to its culture, that means that the shaman has grown up within that challenging situation of their own culture, and they have met those challenges within themselves and found the way through to a sense of, my history is not only something that I don't need to carry, it's actually something that becomes part of my strength. That's what healing is. Healing means I'm transforming difficult things that have happened to me into strength now. For me, for my family, for my people sometimes. And so for me, as a Jewish man, that meant doing a lot of work with, in my early shamanic engagement, I had an experience with the drums of losing control in a very unpleasant and difficult way. And really losing a sense of presence, of knowing what was going on. And in that state, my body remembered, I could feel in my body the memory of what it was like as a child to die in a concentration camp. This was a horrible experience, and I was shaking from it for days. And yet I was also really glad to have had it, because it made sense of a kind of tension that had been in me. We might call it post-traumatic stress, that if it's not dealt with by the people who experience that trauma, then it's part of our inheritance. We are carrying the undigested stories of our ancestors, as well as their dignity and the fact that they managed to pass life on, and the beauty that they experience. We are inheritors of that. And there is interesting research going on about that, isn't there now, in epigenetic fields, about how a trauma to a great grandmother could affect the behavior of somebody, something born now. And this is again where I feel that shamanism has something really vital to offer. What does healing mean? If healing means taking personal hurt and family hurt, ancestral hurt and trauma, and transforming that into strength, into resource, into resilience, into strong heart, into empathy. Like if I am able to acknowledge my suffering and not be fully identified through it, then I can acknowledge yours. I can be with you in yours. Then we can start to have a conversation in the areas where there is hurt. And in our modern world, where so much of the conversation isn't conversation at all, it's more like a, boxing match of not listening, where we're and polarization. There is such a need for practices, simple, effective solutions where we can come back to our own ground and be much more, we call it standing at the center of your own circle. Like, so that when you're in conversation, there is backbone, there is ground, there is interest, there is, oh, you're different. Like, tell me what your experience is. You have a different point of view. And we start to do what shamans have always done, which is to understand the intelligence of the greater system, which is not just human, but is mineral and animal and vegetable, and is the biosphere that we're part of, that we all know our way of life, our disembodied way of life. Like, you want to know what's the result of a disembodied way of life. Put the news on at 6 o'clock, look at the climate crisis, look at the way we don't listen to one another, look at the state of marriage, look at the reality that there is such an epidemic of loneliness in the modern world. Apparently, I read the other day, I'd love to know this. Oh, this was the ex-Director General, Surgeon General of the United States government, who has done research saying that the depth of loneliness that is in the modern world is so great, it has the deleterious effect on the body equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes every single day of your life. That's not good for us. That's not good for us. So there's so much that's going on, and where there is conflict, where there is trauma, this is the place of interest for that archetype of, we might call it the inner shaman. The inner shaman is interested in conflict and difficulty and trauma because they know it as a source of enormous energy, life energy, a lot of life energy held in those challenging situations. So their work then is to release that. Hi, welcome. Come on in. Their work and the work of a shaman in the modern world is to support people to safely, step by step, come back into the territory and the intelligence of their own bodies. You guys make yourself comfortable. I'll have a drink of water for a moment. Thanks. So There's so much that could be said. The work that Susanna and I have developed as a result of all of our experience, which has not just been shamanic experience, it's been family constellations, systems theory, Gestalt psychotherapy, understanding of how change happens in the psyche. So much research included in our work is a body of work which is called movement medicine. And it's very simple. Movement is medicine. I think that's a pretty well commonly accepted fact these days, that movement is good for us, not moving is not good for us. A sedentary life, like even, sitting for an hour, we would learn much more if we were walking around, listening and engaging the body. If we engage our physical intelligence and our emotional intelligence along with our mental intelligence, we're so much broader and deeper in our capacity to learn, to actually learn. So movement medicine is the body of work that we've created. It's very simple. We invite people to be moved by rhythm. That's pretty much it. Let yourself be moved by rhythm and let yourself let go and see what arises. That's the basis. Bring the focus of your attention for a little while away from thinking about what you're thinking about to the actual experience. Again, interoceptive, body-rooted intelligence. What's the experience of being here? And how does that move? How does that express itself? How does that become a dance? And as I already told you, dance was not my thing. I realized in the end it wasn't dance, it was that horrible feeling of self-consciousness, feeling uncomfortable, like, oh, what are people going to think if I'm expressing myself as a dancer? This internal dialogue that can be quite crippling for many people, really not easy to get past, except for it is. I was amazed when I met Gabrielle Roth in a dojo in East London in 1988. There was about a similar amount of people in the room. And I went in there, and I already told you I hated dancing. And all these people in leotards doing yoga and stretching. And I was like, oh my God, what have I come to? I've got to have 3 days in the room with these people. And the whole thing, it was about, I saw somewhere shamanic healing, and I was like, boom, that's what I'm looking for. I missed all the stuff about dance, and I was horrified to discover we were going to be dancing for 3 days. But it took Gabrielle 15 minutes to help me to shift my attention from this constant chatter, internal dialogue that often we think of as, this is who I am. It's not who we are. It's a small part of who we are, an important part, but a small part of who we are. To the direct experience of the body. And what did I discover? I discovered that this body, if I let it, was actually quite expressive by itself. It wasn't that I had to be creative. It is creative. Life is creative. And this body is alive. The only difference between a living body and a dead body, if you put them next to each other, it's very simple. One of them is moving and the other one isn't. Therefore, life is movement. It's really simple. Therefore, when I dance, I am saying yes to that part of my intelligence that is movement, that is beating the heart, that is circulating the blood, that is replacing my cells, that is keeping me alive. That intelligence, we call it the unbroken part of our intelligence. That is ancient, that is physical, that is, thank God, doesn't rely on our thinking brain. Can you imagine if we actually had to try to be in charge of how the body lives from here, like, liver, kidney, like deal with the blood and filter this and, pull the ingredient and the nutrition out of that, but get rid of that. you'd be popped in a few seconds. There is an intelligence in the body that is so connected to the intelligence of nature, because it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. This body is earth. It's not a metaphor. It's made of that material. The heat in my body is sunlight transformed through food. I am a solar powered being. I am 65% water, aren't we? We are watery. Therefore, if I allowed myself to identify with the part of me that's water, and I were to say, how does that move? I might discover a little bit more fluidity or depth or like the strength of moving water. And the same with breath. So we work a lot in our work with the simple reality that the body is elemental. It's elemental. And why does that help? Because when I feel this physical body as earth, and I put my attention into it, and I give my weight to the ground, and I do what you showed us to do earlier on, let my feet spread out a little bit and feel the warmth there, there's a connection, then immediately I'm more earthy, I'm more grounded. And wouldn't that be useful if you knew how to do that? Or you needed a little bit of punch and a little bit of life energy, and you know through practicing and through dancing a lot that how that fire, how to be in touch with that fire element that's in the body and can move with that. Then when you need that dynamic, edgy boundary to be safe, to be clear, to articulate, to illuminate, then you have that energy of fire about you. And this is the way that shamans have worked always. It's not about some far off, far out, exotic experience. Sometimes that happens, and that's wonderful. We get to experience something utterly mysterious and out of the ordinary. But shamanism has always been about living life, being here, being in relationship with each other, being in direct relationship with the land, with the seasons, with the food we eat, with the animals we eat. If you are, and I am, like that's like to actually know what that means to put on a pair of leather shoes, what that means to, come into a building and recognize that all of this, everything, all of this is part of what we have received from the material of the earth. And when we lose connection with the body, we lose connection with the earth. And the further those things move, the more we don't recognize the damage we're doing to our own bodies, to each other, and to the environment that we're part of. So the inner shaman is that part of us that reminds us, hey, like, don't just eat, stop a moment. Like, what is this food? Where did it come from? What's the work that's been involved in putting this food on my plate? Like, who planted that seed? Who nurtured it? Who did the work of growing it and bringing it to a place and packaging it so that it would end up on my plate? And where does all this come from? Then through that, there is an experience of connection, actual connection. I'm in touch with life. And this is the biggest challenge, I think, for our modern world, which is so disembodied. Less so now. There's this kind of uprising, like a embodied revolution, like, oh, the body, yes, that matters. We actually have to look after this if we want to be healthy and be a healthy presence on this earth. The Achua, by the way, and their colleagues, the Zapara Nation, they have this very clear prayer, which is that we have the capacity as a species to become a presence on this earth that is just, fulfilling, and sustainable. Those three things. And those three things, justice, sustainability, and fulfillment, are a really good way of describing shamanic practice. Because in any shamanic practice, like if you, there's so much being offered these days, so much medicine coming in from everywhere. You know, I get to meet a lot of young people who have suffered from unguided or too much of a particular kind of experience that's, again, so far out of their day-to-day that there's no connection, there's no structure to be able to build a connection. So there becomes more and more of a separation. Anyway, I want to give you a little bit of experience of this rhythm, and just to invite you to be open to sense what kind of difference the listening to the drum might create if you can bring your attention into your body. There's two different drums here, and I decided I wanted to bring both of them. This one comes from Matis Penta, this beautiful old Sami shaman. And when he gave it to me, and I started playing it, we had like a little ritual where he gave me the drum and he had another one, and we started playing the drum, and I was playing. And he stopped me right in the middle. I was like in my kind of trance focus. And he just said, Yakov. Like, oh, what? He said, Yakov, look at that drum. I looked at him. He said, what is it? And I said, well, it's birch wood and it's reindeer skin and antler and a brass ring. He said, what does that mean to you? That this animal died and that now this skin is your drum. What does that mean to you? And I was like, well, I actually don't know. I could make something up, but I don't know. And he said, from the way you were playing that drum, that's really clear. You're just making sound. Just not even making sound, making noise. And so at that time I was a vegan. He said, you know, part of receiving a drum like this is then you need to go and hunt. You need to know what it means. If you're going to play this and hold this, then you need to know what it means to take the life of a deer and to gut it and skin it and know what it feels to be a killer and to eat its warm liver. You need to know. If you don't know that, then you have no right to hold this. I was really upset with him. So I was like, you didn't tell me that when you invited me here to give me your drum. But I'm super grateful because I found a man who looks after the deer population on a 6,000 acre organic farm in Wiltshire. And he calls himself the wolf. He's the wolf for that herd of deer. And he keeps the herd healthy because without natural predators, which we've killed off, the herd becomes overpopulous, overgrazes, and creates a lot of suffering within the herd. So he does the job that the wolf would do. And he showed me, I was amazed, like his capacity to see what was happening in the herd, like who were the older ones, who were the ones that had been injured. And he could tell from the antlers, the health of the antlers, just looking from a long way. So he gave me this opportunity. And I'm happy to tell you, it completely broke my heart to kill that deer. I cried, I'm not ashamed to say, for a long time over the body of that deer. And it's not that I felt I'd done something wrong. I knew it was the right thing to do. But the grief I felt at that loss and the violence of that moment was so intense. And this guy was so good with me. I don't smoke, but he gave me a cigarette because I really needed one. And I just sat and, and then I sang. So close the eyes. This drum has a story. Put your feet to at least 1 foot on the ground. And see if you can allow the body to listen. And breathe just a little bit more than you normally would. Feel to move a little bit in the chair. Don't worry, nobody's watching. Everyone's got their eyes closed. Sense that impulse in the body. Breathing just a little deeper. Then when the drum stops, which it will do very suddenly, keep the eyes closed. And again, see if you can sense any effect in the sensation in the body. Breathing, just noticing, seeing if you can find the language that names what you notice. Different sound. Breathing, feet on the ground. Letting rhythm be a friend, like an old friend. Rhythm of the drum, the rhythm of your heartbeat. Noticing any sensation. Being generous with the breath. Breathe in a little bit more than you normally would, let the breath go. Just sensing that movement of life. Whether you move the physical body or not, there is movement in your body. Notice how it responds to the invitation of rhythm. A different sound. Listening, the sensation in the backbone, in the feet, in the hand, the breath. Just noticing life moving inside the body. You might even take a moment just to smile at your own heart, your own inner drum. Take a moment, that heart beats around 100,000 times every day. In a moment, feel the strength of that muscle. The strength of life. In your body, in your structure. There are the voices and the songs and the dances of your people. The land that you come from. The people that are your ancestors. Just for a moment, imagine that you could connect with them across this arc of time. That you could see one of your ancestors smiling at you, glad to see you. Imagine them strong, dignified, how they are. And if you would, if you feel to, just reaching out an imaginary hand towards them. And notice as they put something in your hand. They just say, dear one, my dear descendant, this is to help you with any challenge that you're facing right now. This is a little bit of strength at your back. And if you feel to, if you can, offering something back, may just be a word or a gesture, something acknowledging that because of them, you and we are here. Receiving that simple connection, sense it in the body, in the backbone. Your backbone has just a little bit more support than it did before. Short time, the drum will stop with 9 beats. And at that point, I invite you to gently open the eyes. Keep the eyes looking downwards for a little moment as you come back into the room and the circle. Those of you online, the room that you're in. Very simple, ordinary way, and then you just lift the head and look around and remember we're in Washington, Singer 105. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and gently open the eyes. Just acknowledge these strangers or friends, colleagues, I don't know. You online, hello. I want to give you some time and space if there's anything you want to share about that or anything you want to ask from what I've shared with you. I've just tried to give you a little seed of why shamanism actually remains super relevant in the modern world, for all the reasons I've tried to share with you. And I hope this tiny little experience might help you to have some physical sense of what I'm talking about. Over to you. Any questions or anything you want to share that you experienced, feel free.
Hey,
Hi.
so earlier you mentioned like how when you went to the Amazon, I think you said, and spoke to the shamans there, they said they're not training you to be an Amazonian shaman, but you're to like look for, I guess, something more general in your culture or the patterns and apply it there. On that note, like what are the implications of the ever connected and like mixing of cultures, merging of cultures, both here and across the world with the internet and so on?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I was speaking to a friend of mine called Arkan Dushwala, who's a Quechua medicine man. He's a sun dancer. He's a serious, really, he's worked for life all his life, but that's his thing. And he was telling me that, inviting me to come to a symposium where there's a whole bunch of indigenous wisdom keepers and shamans and people who are, I mean, they are indigenous to their own body and land, but not in the way where they're coming from a living culture that's traditions are still alive. And to have this dialogue, like his question was, how can we safely pass on the knowledge that's useful and necessary for us as a species at this time without ignoring the damage that was done to our ancestors by you lot. I'm talking about the industrial world. And interestingly, the Achua, they do have satellite dishes now in some of the remote villages. They do have mobile phones. They are engaging with technology. What they tend to do is they try something out, like they tried watching movies for a while. And so, you know, the community would get together, watch a movie. And they discovered that wasn't good for them as a community. So they stopped. They brought in plastic. And of course, everything that they bring from the forest, you know, your plate is a leaf and you just chuck it on the floor and the forest takes care of it in a week. Of course, plastic isn't the same. So then they had to learn like, oh, this is something different. Like, that's not good for us. We need something. We need, like, what is that you guys have got? And there's a really important leader. In fact, he was at King Charles' coronation last week. I couldn't believe it to hear that. But called Domingo Pais, who is an Achua leader, a beautiful, very charismatic, strong human being. And one of the things that he's been really trying to share is that it's actually only through the coming together of the best of all cultures that we will find a solution to our current malaise. So therefore, shamans and surgeons should be having conversations, and, you know, classical musicians and rappers like need to be working to, like, actually the wisdom that's contained in all of these extraordinary places. And he included like the brilliance of what our minds have created, like this, that we can have a conversation with people live anywhere, the brilliance of that. And so I tend to agree that actually it's an inevitable, it's always been like that. You know, chili was not in traditional Indian food. Potatoes were not part of traditional Irish agriculture. things came in through trade and through cooperation often, and through, not always through suffering. And so my sense is that with care, but like, it's like if you quote somebody in a thesis, you have to acknowledge them, right? And so that's the thing that often gets missed, is the acknowledgement of the root of something. And I think if that is offered, then it can be a really good thing. You know, the world's becoming more and more complex, like so much. You know, if you look at modern music, like how many influences are part of pretty much any song, piece of music you listen to.
Yeah, but hasn't something radically changed from what you described as the community tried watching movies and the community tried eating from factory or with factory or something like that? That at the moment we have a rapid change in a way that nobody's controlling, and we don't even know what's actually going on. So say, one of the things we just don't know what the effect will be on online pornography on the kids who are now in school. We have no idea. It's just a huge human experiment without anyone being in any control, and not to mention saying, oh, let's try this, and if not, we stop it. It's somewhat like a rampant process of developments where what's actually even going on, we don't know. What whilst we're sitting here, it's going on, and we have nobody has actually an understanding of what it is. So I think that there is something other than just this neat contained process of there's a small community and they're trying this or that. It's we live in a huge human experiment that is dramatically fast, and we don't know what it really is. So how do we deal with that?
You said something crucial in that we need all cultures to come together. And this is happening. All cultures are now communicating a lot more than they ever did before. But this chaos that is increasing then brings into question, and again, the role of the shaman and trust. So how do you restore trust? And between, if you want to see them as tribes, cultures, whatever, different sides, even interpersonal. So even bringing it to the interpersonal level of a person that has had their trust broken, how do they restore that trust?
So, well, I mean, if you're talking on an individual level, again, indigenous communities that I'm in touch with, if someone is damaged, they don't treat it as it belonging to the individual. It belongs to us. Your damage is our damage. And so that's number one. You know, I once was there, and the shaman asked me to do a healing for his granddaughter. And the granddaughter came for the healing with, I'm not joking, 25 members of her family, all the uncles and aunties, and they all come in. It's all, there's not like, it's like chaos, madness. And then in the middle, this young woman sitting and healing happening. And then there's a sense of connection. So restoring trust. The way that we work with this is really about wounding, or trauma lives in the body. We were talking about the Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, before we began. So the body remembers. So when we do the kind of work we do with rhythm and movement, you can start to sense the impact in your physicality of a break of trust. Like if your boundaries have been broken, if you are somebody who's had that horrible trauma of abuse, how that impacts the body. And you start to build resources around that personally, and in an indigenous context, the family. So there is a holding for that resourcing, and then the resourcing, you recognize I have the power of the living earth in my bones. I'm not just somebody who's had their trust broken. And that gives me ground. And through that ground, I can start to hold that part of my experience and not to separate it off and not to have it hidden and like a big part of my being closed to life as a result of that wounding. So it's a step-by-step process, obviously, but I have been lucky enough to witness people who have suffered the worst kind of human cruelties that can be done to one another, who have done that process of discovering resource, resilience, support, and with that, taken that history and transformed it into, Gabrielle often used to say, transform your suffering into art. Transform your suffering into art. Make something beautiful from it, or something meaningful, something that touches others, something that gives a road for other people. And all I can say is, even with the most extreme suffering, healing is possible and even inevitable, should you choose it.
But do you see a way that shamanism can facilitate trust between cultures as well when there has been this animosity?
Well, again, through personal experience, I've done ceremonies in Bethlehem with groups of militant Palestinians, previously militant Palestinians, many of whom were set out, were at that point of such desperation to become a suicide bomber and to give their life in that cause. And on the other side, Israeli soldiers who have killed. And to, first of all, to work with the Palestinian group by themselves. And I was very clear. I said, look, I will come and do this, but the intention is that this should happen together at some point. There should be a space for this dialogue. You tell me when you're ready for that. And at a certain point, they said, yes, we're ready. And then we brought in a group of previous Israeli soldiers to have this dialogue in ceremony and to be able to, through doing this kind of work of being in my backbone, being able to tell you my story and have you listen and not defend and not attack, but just as a human, hear your experience that, you know, maybe it was my brother-in-law's friend who caused you that suffering. And I'm here listening to you. And I'm feeling that suffering. And I'm with you. And then I get to tell you my story. And we hear one another. And that's the only way that peace has ever happened.
Dialogue. Yeah.
Dialogue. And usually through women, like in Ireland, it was the women who, you know, basically started sitting down over cups of tea saying, we got to talk.
Thank you.
But yes, 100%. Yeah.
More questions?
If I have time.
Yeah. We are 15 minutes over our usual
Are
time. So let's, I just want to say that if online people have to leave, please.
I
Go
completely
ahead,
lost track of the time.
My question was, well, I have two questions. I'll go with the lighter one, which is that we were talking about medicine and conversing with the forest spirits about how did you phrase it? What your life is for. And you said people go and talk to spirits and then they, you know, talk through to their community what the spirits tell them. What do the spirits tell them? What are people's lives for, as per the forest spirits?
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Number one, I think what's very important about that process is it's not just that you're sent to listen to the spirits and then you go off and do it. you then have to bring that back to your community, who will kind of basically help to guide you if you've kind of gone way off track, but less likely in a situation like that. So the kinds of things are very, very simple. Like, listen, you know, you're a hunter. You, as a young woman, you have always been interested in how we're working things out. You're actually probably, you're going to be a spokesperson for your people. So maybe you need to go to the city and go to the university and learn this and then bring it back. So it can be that specific. They'll get very clear directions. Sometimes people will just see a vision of they're building a roof, and that's they kind of go, building a roof. Well, oh, that is what I've always done. I'm always creating shelters for people. That's my work. That's going to be my work in the community. I'm a creator of shelters, and that might be physical, or if you're more a people person, it might be more metaphorical. And so these kinds of things, it's very direct. And the key again is that the medicine is, it's the purpose of it, as I understand it. I did ask them, has anyone from outside the forest ever done that ceremony? Because I was kind of interested. And they were like, I'll think about that. And he came back the next day and they said, look, we're terrified. We grew up here. You die of fear. Don't do it. I was like, okay, thank you very much. Leave that one over there. But the thing is that the medicine gives you that sense of connection to yourself, and through yourself to the spirit. So it's not like I've left my own intelligence behind, or my own knowledge of myself. I'm bringing that, like, this is what my life has been about. These are the things that give me joy. That's often the question. What gives me joy? Imagine that as your career question, number one questionnaire. What gave you joy as a child? So what they receive tends to be a reflection of something known, but taken to the next chapter. Like, look at it in that more like next step of its evolution. Oh, there you are doing that. Or now you're a politician for your people, for instance.
So it can change.
It develops. It would develop. Those visions, you know, this is very interesting. The indigenous people tend to do those ceremonies very rarely, very, very rarely. Like, because if you receive a vision, then your job is to then go and live that vision, make it day to day, make it your life, not be with it for a few days, tell a few friends about it, and then go and get your next vision, which is the modern way of doing this. So we become vision junkies. Like, I just need a new vision because, you know, I tried that one for 6 days and it's too hard. Yes. So I need a new vision. And that's very sad in a way. That's to do with lack of integration. That's to do with lack of guidance. That's to do with lack of, I would say, shamanic holding. Can be community spirit of that kind of holding. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It's, cool. The first spirits are terrifying, and you go and get scared to death, and they tell you to build a roof.
Yes.
Must be really worth it. Yeah. I've got more, but we can circle back to it this time.
Any more, guys? I'm happy to sit with you a while longer and hear anything you want to share. Yeah.
So earlier this week, I went to a meditation seminar that is hosted by the Plum Village monk. So they are the pioneers, as one of the prominent figures of mindfulness, and there's a sect of Zen Buddhism as well. So I had a conversation with one of the nuns, Sister Generosity. That's the name. That's an interesting name as well. So we talk about Zen Buddhism, and essentially the tenet of that religion or philosophy is the realization of your inner divine nature. So meditation is a tool for you to clear the board, for you to realize that you have the capacity to mental well-being. Essentially, those are resources that is within yourself. So my ongoing research is actually on the healing power of religions, of being a part of religion. So that's the thing that I'm investigating. But do you think that is something that is in common with what you're preaching? Or it could be a unifying trait of religions in general? Because for me, from my own understanding, there are 3 principles to a religion. There is the communal aspect of being a part of that experience. So you went to church, you went to a synagogue, you went to a mosque, being part of that community. The second one is being part of a ceremony. So you rely upon traditions that stretches back like thousands of years. So you became a continuation of that tradition. And thirdly would be the philosophy that you follow. It could be something that is specific to believing in a creator God, or it could be something that's more akin to Buddhism, believing in reincarnation, how you should live your life, what kind of moral philosophy should you follow. So these are 3 principles from what I can see that a religion provides to its believer, its followers.
Yes.
Do you agree with me?
I think that's beautiful. What a wonderful way to describe religion. I've never heard such a positive description of religion in my life, and it's wonderful. What's your name?
Andy.
Andy, thank you so much for that. And I would say that the difference there is, well, I mean, I think in our modern industrial world that there's a lot of emphasis put on finding your own truth these days. Like you have to discover your own truth. And I think that's part of what's interesting about shamanism, that it's less about belief and it's more about being put in a situation where you have direct experience of something. And I suppose that's similar in religion. If you're in the mosque and you're really in that prayer, you experience something greater. And I think that is the purpose, that you are given the opportunity through ceremony to have direct experience. And direct experience is much more interesting than belief, because experience is something that can't be taken away. It's something known to you rather than something taught to you. And I think both are necessary. Like when you go out to do a ritual, it's great that you get a structure, like the skeleton is the structure of the body. If you take away the structure, we're not going anywhere. So the structure is necessary, and so is the fluidity. And so I think shamanism has that also ongoing development that has roots that go back thousands of years, but that is adaptive to its environment.
Like Christianity definitely helped people become entirely disembodied, right? And so did the other similar religions. Do you think the same of Buddhism, or at least like from my like Western perspective on Buddhism, it is rather static. So I don't feel like it helped me become more embodied.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we have to see that where those practices came from of sitting came from a very active physical way of life. Like, we're working all day and then we can sit and the body is used and tired, and there's a potential then for some kind of peace. But when you're paying no attention to your body and you just, it's like I heard somebody describe it as a taxi that takes my head from one meeting to the next. That if you're treating your body in that way and then you try and sit down and meditate, your body is like, it's full of everything. It's so busy. And this was one of Gabrielle Roth's great contributions. She said the best way for people who've grown up disembodied to still the mind is to move the body. And I can absolutely concur with that. If I really let myself move to a good piece of music, I'm empty, or play the drum. and make sound, that rhythm will just, it empties out the fog of daily life and just brings a clarity and more of a sense of, I can receive something. So yeah, it's hard to meditate if you're not engaging your body. It can lead to more, and it can, or any practice can lead you off path, easily, and the thing we always have to watch out for is that whole spiritual bypassing thing, which kind of goes to the peak experience and ignores all the biography and just goes straight to it and then collapses back into what was known before. So again, for us, taking ownership of our bodies, taking some kind of responsibility for what we can, I say it's absolutely vital for anything that matters to us. It's like, it's the bottom line, really. And yeah. Thank you for your question.
Can I share the experience of being through this, the beating of the drum, like from the moment it started to the moment I opened my eyes? It was a very intense experience, and I didn't expect that. Where do I start? First of all, I have to say that after I opened my eyes, after I was in that state for a while, felt vibration at certain parts of my body, which were my hands, my fists. I felt compelled to clench my fists really hard. My jaws, my mask here, and the knees and part of my legs. So I also felt like I wanted to jump, but I didn't.
Good.
This vital energy, or however to call it, that you mentioned before at some point, I experientially felt it, and it was incredibly intense, and it wanted to go somewhere. I'm not sure where did it go. I'm still trying to find out, but and through the images that you try to conjure with the whole history of the drum and what it means, I also kind of felt this very intense tendency to violence in a way. And I was there, and I was trying to come to terms with it. It was like, where is this coming from? Why? Why do you do this? And I think it is not a harmful kind of violence. I felt like a revolutionary kind of tendency to this. And this is where I felt connected to when it comes to the past. I felt like a revolutionary figure. But that was a very interesting experience of self-knowledge. Thank you for that.
Thank you for telling us and sharing. What's your name?
For this.
Fades.
Yeah.
Wow, where's that from?
Greece.
Surrounded by wonderful solutions today. Wonderful, thank you. Amazing. Yeah, when I was listening to you describing that sense and the fists and the tendency, like the feeling of violence, which you've translated into a sense of revolution and wanting to go somewhere, I think the drum is like medicine. And if you take medicine seeks out dis-ease or places that need to move. And so the drum is a bit like taking some kind of substance that is
It's real
medicinal.
close.
It really is, and it catalyzes what wants your attention. So that would be like the beginning of a process or the next step of a process. But good, man, really good to hear. Thank you.
As we have
Very
no
well.
question that I can see from our online participants, I would like to close the online meeting at this
Yeah.
point. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you in 2 weeks when we have, yeah, right?
Yes,
Is Ravidas coming?
Ravidas is coming here in
Good.
2 weeks.
Ravidas.
So hope to see you then. Thank you for joining and bye-bye.